Hello, Johnny Long here. I'm in the slightly odd position of reading out an advert about how we have no adverts on Escape Collective. Now, I don't think all ads are evil, but I definitely prefer our little world to exist without them. Our website is so clean, and our podcasts are blessedly free from any messages imploring you to buy some green gloop that would definitely make its way through your system quicker than the time it took to put your credit card details in to buy 6 months worth of the stuff. The trade-off here, in order to keep things nice and pure, is we need you, yes you, the person listening, to sign up to become an Escape Collective member. That's the only way we can make this membership-funded model work. We don't have to go with our begging bowl to marketing executives like the vast majority of cycling media do. I will not drink the green goop. You can't make me. If you are already a member, thank you so much. You are appreciated beyond words. And if you know someone who's on the fence about signing up, why not give them a friendly little nudge? Hey, if we sign up enough members, maybe I will drink the green goop after all. Go to escapecollective.com/member to sign up.
Welcome back to the Unchained Binge Podcast, everybody. I'm Kaylee Fretz. I am joined today by Johnny Long, who has a Netflix account. Congratulations, Johnny.
Thanks once again. Still using it, still enjoying it.
And Kit Nicholson. Welcome, Kit.
Thank you for welcoming me.
We're going to talk today. You're very welcome.
Yeah.
We're going to talk today about episode 4 of the Unchained Binge Netflix series. You may have noticed that there was slightly less joie de vivre in my voice, a little less zhuzh in my voice today. It's because this episode is rough. It's rough. It is. So title for Gino, and so anybody who's watched the first couple episodes knows exactly where we're going in this one before you even hit play. Kit, give me a synopsis before we go anywhere.
So in this episode, we dig deeper into the mindset and motivations of Bahrain Victoria's Gino Mäder's team in the weeks after Gino Mäder's death at the Tour de Suisse, 2 weeks before the Tour. Specifically through Pello Bilbao, who was particularly close to the young Swiss talent. We also see more of the AG2R team with the introduction of Felix Gall to the GC fight and the hunt for stage wins after Ben O'Connor faltered.
Yeah, and it's a very emotional episode for obvious reasons, right? I guess I kind of appreciate that they didn't like stick this up, in the first or second episode. Like you get a chance to get into the show, you get a chance to get into the tour before they hit you with this sort of emotional. I mean, there's a bit of it earlier on, obviously, but before they hit you with this very emotional episode, the characters that this episode sort of centers on are characters that we have both seen previously in the series and will definitely come back in the series. Let's just sort of run through them real quick. So the two big ones are the Bahrain Victorious duo of Pello Bilbao and Matej Mohoric. What else can we add in terms of context around these two? I mean, maybe we'll start with Bilbao because he sort of centers a little bit more in the episode because he ends up winning a stage.
Pello Bilbao opens up the sprint. Okay, go!
Tenías una motivación especial. Cuando crees que no puedes sacar más fuerzas, pues te puede dar un último empujón.
Pello Bilbao wins for Bahrain Victorious. Grande! Pello wins the stage.
One special day in my life for sure. It's a hard job we are doing, but these moments repay everything.
Bilbao is a Basque rider, a Spanish rider. He'd probably prefer Basque. Sort of long time, kind of edge of the GC fight kind of rider, right? Like one of those guys who 5, 6, 7 years ago we were sort of talking about as a potential sort of contender for races like the Tour de France or the Vuelta or whatever, but never could quite get there, and has really very effectively pivoted to that sort of like fight for a top 10 and stage hunting, right?
I'd say that's accurate.
Yeah, he's done the 2023 Tour de France was his 15th Grand Tour, so he's been around the block. He's an exceptionally good climber, and so he's nearly always up there with the big climbing days. Less of a time trialist, so he struggles to compete with the likes of Vingegaard and Pogačar. But yeah, he's won 2 stages at the Giro d'Italia. He's come very close to winning stages at the Vuelta. He hasn't quite finished the trilogy, although I can imagine that is now on the cards, having won a stage at the Tour. But he would have been one of the riders who was a protected rider, well, at any race he goes to, really. Bearing in mind that the Tour de France started in the Basque Country this year, we wondered if he would be targeting maybe the first yellow jersey for Gino on those really hilly roads that he will know very, very well.
I'm sure he was. He definitely was.
Yeah.
He just was not successful.
Yeah, but we also get an element of his. He's a family man, and he is more concerned about risk. He's a very, very good rider, and you can almost bank on him doing something. Same with Matej Mohoric.
Matej Mohoric, also a very, very, very good rider. In fact, the reigning gravel world champion,
UCI gravel world champion.
UCI gravel world. There's a couple
difference.
Different gravel world championships. Yeah, he recently went over to Unbound gravel, for example. It didn't finish, ended up flattening a whole bunch of times. But Mohoric is sort of known as this. He's very, very, very intelligent, and I'm not even talking just by pro cyclist standards. I'm talking just in general, like quite bookish. And here's a bit of foreshadowing for you. There's an interview that will almost certainly show up later in the show that is sort of known to be one of the greatest post-stage interviews in recent Tour history, and it's done in a second language, right? I think that's really something that ties both of these riders together, in fact, and it's, I don't know what it is about Bahrain Victorious, but that seems to attract a certain type of quite intelligent, quite introspective thinkers, right? I mean, Gino Mäder was known as a thinker. Pello Bilbao is definitely known as a thinker, and in fact, after his stage win, none of this isn't included in the show because they mostly ask him to speak in Spanish in the show, but he in English. So again, second language. The post-race press conference after he won that stage was hugely impressive. The way that he was able to talk about his feelings in that moment, in what was clearly a hugely emotional moment, in a second language, in front of the world's press was, it was, barring the Mohoric interview, one of the other sort of post-race interviews that really stood out to me in over a decade of doing this. So we've got, these two, again, sort of thinkers, I think is a good way to put them, working to honor their teammate, who was also a similar sort of, a similar style of person.
What a day. What a day for you. What a day for the team.
It was hard to prepare the last 2 weeks. But same with the family at home, and same with my kid Martina. She helped me a lot to just keep calm, be positive, and put all my positive energy to try to do something nice in the Tour. I crossed the line and I just put out all the anger I had in the inside, and remembering the reason of this victory, special one for Gino.
That brought so many emotions out for us, not just because we actually realized our ambition and win a stage to honor Gino, but also because it was Pello who won. Pello and Gino were really close to each other. That put it more behind us, like we were still angry that he was not with us, but we realized that we need to accept that fate and carry on with our lives. I hope he is proud watching us from the sky.
We also meet Vincent Lavenu kind of properly for the first time.
Yeah, because last time we saw Editoire, we were focused on Julien Jourdi, the sports director, whereas we've got Vincent Lavenu, the CEO, Vincent Lavenu, and both on the bus and in the car. He's a good character, I think.
And Felix Gall, who you get the sense that Netflix realized quite late that they were going to need a bunch of Felix Gall footage.
Yes.
and didn't have that much because they didn't realize that they needed to follow him around quite so much. And then all of a sudden, he's the GC contender for the whole team, right, for AG2R. So we have these sort of two things running in parallel throughout this entire episode. We've got obviously the main story, the Gino Mäder story, and the way that his team is seeking to honor him in via victory, basically. And then the other through line on all of this is more AG2R drama, which seems to really, they're just honed in on this. They really, really like it. They love the fact that Ben O'Connor is clearly an emotional guy and a reactionary guy a little bit. And they're using both those two things and kind of flipping back and forth throughout the episode. So what do we learn out of this episode?
Biggest thing I learned out of this episode is that Pello Bilbao is a surfer. I had no idea. And he was maybe, well, not the last, but if you asked me to pick from last year's Tour peloton who might be a surfer, Pello Bilbao would not cross my mind.
I can see him with like a shark tooth necklace with like his haircut. Yeah. Like he could be hanging around some town outside of a major Australian city, doing something. It's quite odd that he's just up there before a home Grand Depart catching some waves. Meanwhile, Mark Cavendish won't even step on a trampoline back home in Essex, which seems to be different approaches to sort of damage limitation.
But that might be part of the, part of his interview early in the show was talking about how he'd prepared and wondering whether he would actually go to the Tour after being at the Tour de Suisse where Gino Mäder died. And, we've gathered since then that, so this is almost probably 10 months after the Tour de France, quite recently in the present tense speaking now, he wrote an article for our friends over at Rouleur, talking about Gino Mäder, and he said, he really wanted to go to the funeral, but the team decided that it was better for everyone to kind of continue to do what they needed to do, but to do it at home. And but he said, he went home, he went to be with his family. He spent a few days off the bike, and then so I reckon, I would imagine, that's something that you would not expect a Tour de France rider to be doing in preparation, but he needed to get into his safe space. He needed to get into his comfort zone, get back into himself, spend time with his family, and do what he loves. So that's what I saw from that. Especially as maybe if he fell off, he wouldn't mind too much.
It was. I do remember it was obviously super raw. Like in that in-between period, do you remember Fred Wright won the British national champs? He was on the tour squad as well, and he was obviously
that was just
super
a weekend
emotional.
After,
yeah, but then afterwards as well, the reporters there were asking him very pointed questions, asking him to react to it, and he was just there my friend's just died. What are you doing? It was quite. Yeah. I think it's we don't know how the riders would have felt about the Netflix thing beforehand, but I think having that episode is probably quite a nice thing now, where it's they're able to get their own thoughts and feelings on the record after the fact, where it's not you're getting asked before a stage, after a stage, because that's inevitably what happened at the Tour, right? Is that when Pello Bilbao and Matej Mohoric won those stages, the story is that they've a story they've helped create is that they're riding for Gino. It's obviously this huge thing, but it's so much harder for them to in that moment, even though they did a good job, to really say exactly what they want to, you'd imagine.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible when you think about it.
Yeah.
I do think that the riders involved will probably appreciate this episode. I think it's pretty well handled. I think it's about as well handled as you could do so, right? And I do think it's humanizing for all those that were involved, and it changed my perspective slightly. Not massively, but slightly on what those guys were going through, right? We knew in theory what they were going through, and we were looking at them, face to face and watching them try to wrestle with this. But sort of some of the other stuff that Netflix brought in, I think some of the bits from home and with Bilbao's family, et cetera, I think that really did add an extra element for me. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning here is that this isn't a team that necessarily had the best reputation, and that's no fault of the riders, never was any fault of the riders, but is purely because of the sponsor, really. And this I don't know, does some or undoes that a little bit, maybe.
Well, it just reminds you that, they're peddling billboards. And yes, it's really hard to sometimes, to back a rider or a team, or to hear the name of a particular team shouted in commentary, X is attacking it, or whatever. It's sometimes it sits uncomfortably. But these riders, they some of them have some agency in who they choose to ride for, but a lot of them really don't. Most of them really don't. And so it just reminds you that cycling is a sport where, there are a lot of diehard fans of specific teams, but it's a race. It's a sport of riders, of individuals within certain teams. And so, I think most of us would agree that, there are riders on all sorts of teams all over the peloton who we support, and we can see more of them. And when you see that a certain environment is created at a team that you might have not particularly enjoyed the presence of within the peloton, at least in name, it makes it, it just reminds you what's at the heart of the sport. And yes, it's got to run on money, but maybe it's not everything.
I guess to be explicit about it, we're talking about the fact that Bahrain's human rights record is atrocious, right? And so you've got essentially a state sponsored team. Was it business friendly Bahrain? Is what's written on the back of all the buses, and this is a nation, with an absolutely atrocious human rights record that that jails journalists. That the list is very, very long, and I don't think we need to go too deep into the specifics of it now, but that is essentially where I'm coming from with this, which is like, this isn't a team that I think most of us were super happy cheering for prior, necessarily.
And there was a period where if you wrote anything about Bahrain linked to the team, you would get like a cease and desist sent through by lawyers, which was always fun. But there's that, but there's also like a couple of Tour de France ago, we had there's a couple of like, you call them doping raids, but it was like the French police sort of rattling sabers a bit. But when the police do that at the Tour with teams, it does create a level of suspicion. And if we remember with Matej Mohoric, when he won a stage, I think it was a couple years ago maybe, and he zipped his lips, and that was a huge combative sort of day at the Tour. I think I'd gone home by that point. Actually, I wasn't actually on the ground. And that whole episode was what it was. But it doesn't need to necessarily dominate the whole conversation all the time. So I think it's been informative to see other sides to all of these riders, really, but especially a team where, I would speak for myself, and a lot of times where I'm very quick to just sort of cast aspersions and being like, oh, you've taken the Bahrain money, you're zipping your lips. It'd just be easy to dismiss someone that you disagree with. But I think it's good that you get to see all sides to
more facets
these people. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, specifically like the zip lips thing was so the reason why it was relevant is because it's something that Lance Armstrong did back in the day, and specifically he was doing it in relation to Omerta, which was the sort of cultural silence around doping that existed in the 90s and early 2000s, right? And the sort of the cultural side of that was if you did speak out, you were just completely ostracized, right? You were out of the sport. You would never come back. You were chucked to the side. And Armstrong was obviously a big part of making sure that Omerta held strong for throughout his racing career for the most part. Mohoric was doing it for a different reason, and we believe that he just sort of wasn't aware of the history of that particular thing. That he was not aware of the zip lips, if we're believing him on that. But anyway, the point being that there's a fair amount of sort of like background controversy around this team, around some of the riders, around the sponsor. Again, it was just the key point here is it was not a team that a lot of Americans, Western Europeans were getting behind necessarily. And I think that this, for very unfortunate reasons, did serve to humanize the actual riders involved. And that is still, it's an important, I think, lesson, which is that, like I said, we can look at these teams and we can be displeased with, the human rights record of the sponsoring nation state. But we also need to keep in mind that Pello Bilbao is, a family man who likes surfing, and Mohoric, and that they're actual human beings, right? And I think that is really it's the key point in this episode, and the fact that it is episode 4, sort of halfway through the series, I think is not an accident, because it kind of like lops it right in the middle to sort of recenter the entire series around, to return to what we're saying from episode 1, around the stakes of this whole thing, around the stakes of the Tour de France, and the fact that there are professional stakes and there are sporting stakes, but there are also human stakes, and I think that's the whole purpose of this particular episode within the series.
And then they're mirrored in the episode by a very family-friendly brand safe team, who then on the inside seem to be a complete and utter nightmare, where it's like when people talk about blokes not knowing how to talk to each other or like express themselves, this is it. Like everyone's sort of tiptoeing around, not avoiding difficult conversations necessarily, but it's just it's understandably painful in some ways, but it's also like, if this was, I don't know, maybe it's just the tour and the tour makes everyone a bit crazy, but it's it's a lot. It's a lot when we consider the actual stakes,
Yeah, I kept coming back to this recurring theme of leadership and what it kind of means at the Tour de France, and what it means within a team, and what it means for the egos involved, right? Because this is something that we've seen already in these first 4 episodes, and we will continue to see throughout the rest of the series, is like this sort of dynamic around who's going to be a leader and who's going to work for whom, and these things that from the outside and certainly in real time, when we're covering the race in real time, we don't always have the most insight into, right? We're not always sure exactly who is working for whom, or what has been said in the in the team meeting in the morning, for example, or whether orders are actually being followed. That's one of the big things. And in terms of sort of things we learned out of this episode, is sort of how some of that process goes down, at least in a team like AG2R, and what how the various egos involved react to that. And I think that was one of the most fascinating things about this sort of the side thread, the AG2R side thread in this episode is like, let's get to Felix Gall a little bit. We meet him a little bit more in this episode. He's not particularly, I guess, confident.
He's probably had no one talk to him before. He's probably never had a camera in his
He's
face.
a nice, mild-mannered Austrian.
Yeah.
He's like accidentally found himself.
He's so surprised
in this position.
He's more surprised than everyone else who was surprised, yeah.
But at the same time, to return to this sort of theme of leadership, we hear a little bit about how that means that he's not as stressed out as everybody else, right?
Hi, I'm Felix Gall, a rider for Unchained Citroën team. My task for this Tour de France is to support Ben in the mountains. I'm not feeling too much pressure. I don't have the stress of a leader.
Because one of the recurring themes in this show is whoever's been tagged as the leader of their team, particularly if it's a relatively young rider. If you're looking at like O'Connor, etc., it's a huge burden, right? It's a massive burden. We even get a bit of it from Jai, although Jai is pretty chill about it. but that's the Felix Gall bits of this episode do sort of bring that to light, because yes, he's the leader. Yes, he's been sort of thrust into this, but the expectations on him are still relatively low. It's very much like, well, you're the guy now. Do what you
See
can.
what you can do, yeah.
And that's a very different scenario from, you're the guy, you have to be top 5 or else we failed this Tour de France, right? And that is important in sort of understanding the way that these teams operate and the motivations of the riders and things.
Yeah, it's also when it's expecting riders who are just completely outgunned to produce magic. It just seems like a slightly impossible task. I also want to know, when they're talking about in the car, the AG2R Citroën DSs and managers are talking about how, the sponsors won't pay for a rider who gives up and that sort of thing. And it's like, surely Ben O'Connor is not a signing based on hitting those demographics for AG2R Le Mondial, which is like a huge French sort of bank, and Citroën, which is a French car brand. Surely Ben O'Connor is a sporting acquisition to try and achieve results rather than, I don't know, that bit was just a bit,
I guess they
to
just
me,
don't want to be spoken of in negative terms. That's the theory behind it. And
I guess
the sponsors might not stick around if they keep pinning their hopes to a rider who gives up easily.
Yeah, but then if I was Ben O'Connor and I had to deal with, is it Geordie? Where he's just like
Julien Gildy.
And he's not even shouting in like a Grisha Neiman type way, where he's telling me just like how great I am. to like spur me on. It's just like, just go. He's just like telling you a direction.
Yeah.
And then like the team meetings as well. Like I couldn't decide whether they were like, sometimes we see like these slightly made up team meetings to avoid the real ones where they're like, if that guy like cuts you up, then you're gonna, you know, smash him or that sort of thing. So it's hard to have a whole opinion on these guys sometimes.
There was on the team meetings though. I think we had our first absolutely confident, candid team meeting in the Bahrain Victorious bus. It was the first meeting I think that we've seen with the candid camera kind of looking over all of them. Quite early on when they were all in a state of undress, when they were talking about trying to, I think it was before the Puy de Dôme stage, and then you get the S2E4 team bus where it's it's a handheld camera. The quality's much better, but you saw Pello Bilbao looking quite relaxed and Jack Haig zipping up his, I don't know, but the one of my favourite moments was when Lavenu was sitting next to Ben O'Connor and talking about destiny. And I don't know if you caught that, but I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, if this is destiny, then that's what it is, or something. It was a very interesting kind of alternative, I don't know, management style.
Vincent Lavenu, the nihilist, like, it is what it is.
Just to stay on Lavenu for a moment, it was such an interesting contrast. So we got the contrast between O'Connor and Gull, who, I think they're fairly similar in that I think O'Connor is, as he said in this episode, semi-confident, but he's more determined about being a leader, whereas Gull, I think, in last year's Tour de France and at the Tour de Suisse before that, realised, he's actually quite good. And this was a realisation he himself had, but he was still trying to, he wasn't a leader, as we've said. So there are those two slightly different characters. And then you've got the difference between Julien Jourdi and Vincent Lavenu in the car. And Lavenu's like, no, chill out. They're on a descent. It's dangerous. Don't egg him on too much. He says,
don't spook him. Because he's shouting so loud into the... Because it's not like you're banned from talking to them on the descent. Like literally the next scene cuts and it's another DS giving instructions to a rider on a descent. So it must be something very particular about Geordie's instructions.
He was getting very, very excited because Gull was about to win a stage. Yeah. But it's... I don't know. Again, we've got some really distinct characters in this episode.
And then there's the Irish guy trying to hold it together.
Oh, the mediator again.
Like in America, Kaylee, do you have Wallace and Gromit? The animated like short films, the dog and the bald man. The Irish guy, is his name Stephen Barrett.
He
introduced him a couple of episodes ago.
He's just there, like he's doing like the Jim Halpert, like Wallace and Gromit type, like eyes, like oh my god, what's going on? Like, just like
trying to get them to communicate properly.
Just like happy to be in the position he's found himself in, but also just like I have so little control over affecting outcomes here. I'm just going to try and do my best.
So in series 1, AG2R didn't come across particularly well, right? Nope. Like they came across as a bit of a shit show, but they let the cameras back in. Right? Do we think this is the end of that? Like, they are not portrayed. Jourdi's not portrayed particularly well. O'Connor is not portrayed particularly well. Like there's sort of bits of like attempts to humanize O'Connor, for example, but we mostly just get him kind of freaking out or complaining or not being able to do what he is being asked to do. Like it's not a good portrayal of the whole team, really.
I just couldn't get there. It wasn't anything like I should be performing and how I've performed in the past. I'm not the best, but I haven't been a nothing rider. Sometimes I have done some really great things. I was dreamed to be a leader, and I know that's what I am at heart. But that's not possible. So what's the next thing I can do? Go for breakaways? So I tried to go full gas.
Maybe it's a sponsor thing again. Dude, they're getting their name
Getting a lot of
out to the whole
airtime.
world via Netflix. Yeah, I don't think we saw barely any of Lavanu last year. I think he's been a good addition this episode, as has Gol, although he's not a particularly leading man sort of guy. He's a really decent rider and he seems like a nice chap. But yeah.
It's I've seen people reacting to O'Connor and how he's come across in it, being like, oh, you know, they haven't loved it, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself an O'Connor fan necessarily. Like he's always seemed all right, but I don't think it's hard to take that as a reflection of who he is, because like he's having to lead this team that like last season at the tour, like yeah, they won stage and stuff like that, but they weren't like world beaters, or like it was Ben O'Connor was under so much pressure to do a lot with a little.
Yeah.
And I think that's the natural reaction when you're not a Pogacar or a Vingegaard. Like even we see Pogacar under so much stress this series when he really should not be feeling nearly as much. So I found it like good that O'Connor sort of didn't really mind the cameras were there and was just willing to be 100% himself. Like there was no, can you turn the cameras off please, really, or couching how he was coming across in front of the cameras. It's just like, this is who I am. This is what it's like to be like an outside GC guy at the Tour de France, you know?
Do you think Netflix will try to flip us on him by the end of the end of the series?
They did a bit when
they did a bit here,
like, oh, he's the teammate, and
that's why I asked, because there's like a hint of that. There's a hint of trying to sort of resurrect him as a character by the end of the show, and we'll find out as we get further into the.
Yeah, he is a running. He's a a guest star in a lot of the episodes. A bit like Alaphilippe being the mouthpiece of the peloton, telling us how everyone feels. I don't know. Maybe it's also interesting to. We hypothesized about this last year, but how does this sort of portrayal affect, if it does at all, their marketability? And we know that O'Connor is currently stuck in a revolving door. We're told, it's rumoured anyway, that he might be leaving, he might be staying. Apparently his team wants him to stay.
Yeah.
You just have to, at the end of the day, they know who he is probably a lot better than Netflix is ever going to show. But maybe he should be a domestique. Maybe he really did enjoy working for Gal at the end, and he'd be a great, he'd be a great Sepkus.
This season they sent him the Giro.
Yeah, and he got fourth. Yeah. He came fourth, so pretty good.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
You mentioned Alaphilippe, and it's also the same with Lavanu, how, especially with Alaphilippe, because I guess we speak to him more in English, there is something about when you allow French people and French riders to speak in their own native tongue where they're just like poets. Like Julien Alaphilippe is a professional athlete who, by all accounts, it's sort of the same with Peo Bilbao and Matej Mohoric. Like we assume these guys to some, well, maybe I'm not going to say we all assume it. Sometimes I assume them to just be like dumb jocks who are just good at exercise, and I guess that maybe that makes me feel better. But like Alaphilippe just comes out with some, like when he's talking about how, is it how nothingy like you feel when all that happens? It's just like, who is this guy? Like get him like writing and on commentary.
One of the best quotes from the episode, which unfortunately wasn't translated very well, I don't think, or at least it was, I don't know, they translated it into an Englishism that wasn't as powerful. He talked about flirter avec le risque, flirting with risk, and it was a really, the way that he delivered it, and the way that he talked about Gino Mäder's crash in particular, in through a different tone or a different person, a different language even. It could have sounded somewhat callous or a little unfeeling, but the way that he said it and the way that he and the words that he chose were, he was essentially talking about sometimes you have to take a risk, and that there's some serious risk involved. But if you want to win, and so that can sound. We're all aware of that, but it's especially in the context with which this episode in particular is portrayed. I think I absolutely agree with you, Johnny. It's the French are known for being a poetic, philosophical people, and they certainly show that in this episode.
And then so far we've got from Thibaut Pinot, who's supposed to be like the most charismatic of all the French lot. He's just chucking croissants into a pond. The duality of French.
Before we get to our awards, which we'll wrap up with today, do we think that this episode was effective? Do we think that it did its job, so to speak? And I guess my definition of that would be, did it the name of the episode is For Gino. Obviously, that was sort of directly tied to these riders doing something riding for Gino. But the episode was also for Gino in a lot of ways. And do we feel like Netflix did a good enough job making that episode for Gino? Like, will those involved be pleased with that?
The one thing I would say, and maybe you guys would disagree with me, is that if you don't watch racing outside of the tour and you didn't know that this had happened, or you knew like just the headline, do you really get to know that much about who Gino Mäder is? Which I would have, like, because in the aftermath of his death, there were some amazing stories that came out about like his environmental causes and like how he'd help people out, and like all these, it often happens when people pass away, is that you get these amazing like personal anecdotes, and it would like just dropping one of them in, because we hear a lot about how it's affected the team and everyone else, but I would have maybe just liked to touch more, just so that he's not just like this character of context rather than someone like quite key, and like by all accounts, like the whole time it's like, oh, he's an amazing guy. Well, let's hear the examples that exist. I mean, at a really small level, I kept waiting for somebody to say, or Peyo Bilbao to say, or even when O'Connor, because O'Connor is the only one who actually gives any snippet of info about Mäder himself, in saying after losing to Bilbao that Bilbao was the most deserving of everyone, and describing Mäder as a super talented guy. But yeah, I kept waiting for somebody to say, and this is something that we know as people who follow the sport, that Mäder named his dog after Peyo Bilbao. And that is a hugely, it speaks a lot to their relationship, but also how, I don't know, because, cycling teams are big, and quite often you are only in the team for a couple of years. And you like to think that some of these riders are great friends, but quite often they're not really. Well, they don't see each other. They're just like
and they
passing the night.
And quite often, if you're one of 30 riders on a team and you're a different kind of rider, a lot of riders never meet some of their teammates, except in the peloton or at a team camp at the start of the year. But this guy really was, somebody who broke those rules, and those unspoken cycling rules are the things that we understand about it. And he was a guy who, O'Connor was apparently good friends with him. He was really popular within his team. He had a really close relationship with our central character of this episode. So, yeah, I agree with you, Johnny. I think we could have learned more about him as a character himself.
The dog thing, that's made for Netflix. How did they not include that?
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Somebody must have said it. Yeah, that would have.
I mean, it was in multiple stories at the time.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think we probably mentioned it in the stage report where Peyo won. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, I would almost guarantee it. I go back and check. But so generally a success, other than sort of passing over who Gino was as an actual human being. I do wonder if that was somewhat intentional, in that I guess it was a difficult enough episode as it is for the audience, because there were some really, really sort of emotional moments in it, and like getting to know Gino Mäder even more, would that have made it even more difficult for the audience? And is that what Netflix is maybe trying to balance? I'm not saying that they got it entirely correct. I'm just wondering if that's maybe the way that they were thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt that it was a success in telling us the story of how Bahrain Victorious as a team adapted or carried it with them, and turned, as Peyo Bilbao said, turned his grief into motivation. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. How do you do that with respect? And you interview his mum and see what it means. No, it's there are all sorts of ways that you could do it and do it wrong, and it's a tough one.
The only other thing that was stuck out was the amazing transition from when the riders went up the Puy de Dôme and suddenly there were no fans anymore, and there was the silence. Because on that day, I'd gone to the top. They had a cable car that runs to the top, and a few journalists had sign up that morning, and you were allowed to go to the top. And up there, it was only a few fans, I think, or it wasn't even fans. It's like families of the riders. Like, I chatted to Tadej Pogacar's mum up there, and then TV people working on the TV broadcast, and that was amazing. Because I hadn't really watched that bit because there was no signal up there. So some of the first scenes we saw was Michael Woods arriving at the top. But more stages like that would be cool, where it's just like something different, like that they were so eerie. And
also nobody had been able to recce that climb.
It was
and
just,
usually they all know it to bits, don't they?
Yeah, it was just Roman Bardet, wasn't it?
Roman
local.
Bardet lives in he lived down at the bottom, so he got special dispensation from the from the local council to go up there. I think fellow journalist and friend of the podcast, Chris Marshall Bell, also wrote it one morning. He just went up really, really early.
He's always doing that stuff, isn't he? Making us feel bad
something
for
like
having
that.
lions.
It is possible. I think it was possible to do it. Mohoric's line about like there was no sound and no fans, and so you could just think about your
effort,
like your output, your effort was quite poignant. And like, you know, as was portrayed in the show, he was never really going to win that stage, right? Like they needed Pello Bilbao in the breakaway to win that stage, really. Yeah. But the fact that he was even close was hugely impressive.
I never missed on the stage win. We came so agonizingly close. You start to feel disappointed that we didn't manage to win a stage. But I was still proud of my performance. I would never have been able to do this if under normal circumstances.
I guess it'd be easy to kind of miss this in the show, but like the only reason why Mohoric even finished as high as he did is because he was super aggressive before they even got to the climb, right? Like he came in with an advantage, and that was kind of shown in the series, or in the show, but not really explicitly stated. Yes, because he was hyper motivated, right?
Yeah.
He was riding for somebody else.
Because it was Woods versus Matteo Jorgensen, who was the American runner for Movistar at the time, and I think Woods caught him at some point as well. But it was one of those like climbs. I think they describe it as a wall in the show where it changes so much within like meters, and like big gaps become small gaps very quickly. It was a great stage. I kind of forgot about it. Because it wasn't like a GC day. Sometimes you kind of shelve it a bit in your mind.
Yeah.
But it was great, and it was so because there was no fans. It was so sparse at the top. So like you could just stand next to Jonas Vingegaard, like warming down, like chatting to his family, and just like watch him. I mean, that sounds a bit creepy, but good stage.
Let's get to the awards, and I think we'll be a little bit less.
Let's leave
glib.
the Razzie.
Let's leave. Yeah. So no Razzie today because it's a more serious episode. Mm-hmm. But we can definitely apply some awards, particularly to the AG2R and O'Connor bits of this episode. So the Melodrama Award for episode 4.
Yeah, I think there's one moment in particular, and when I absolutely agreed with the AG2R car. In that you know we've seen O'Connor have outbursts earlier in the series, and I mean I would defend having emotional outbursts, especially if it's technically on the bus, which is out of the public eye. Obviously not in this episode, but I think sometimes I think it's better to swear very loudly or scream into a pillow than let it fester. So I think him screaming in the bus, fine, but when he screamed into the mic, into his radio mic. That and then I think it was Lavanu said it's really annoying when he does that. If he needs to do that, just do it. Don't do it into the microphone because then the whole team has to hear him having his breakdown, his meltdown. So I think
and if you're fully so I want to stop on this real quickly. I know we're in the middle of the awards already, but I want to stop on this real quickly because it just occurred to me that I wanted to talk about this. So when you are fully on your limit, like cracked, like. And trying to keep up with somebody. Like you're not pausing to grab a little microphone on your jersey, squeeze a button
really
and
loud,
talk into it, right? Like you're just not doing that. Your face is on your stem. You're just groveling on your bike.
Out.
Like you probably ripped the ear. Like so. But the reason I mention this is because I think there's something else going on with Ben O'Connor here, and I don't think that we have ever get to the bottom of this. We never really get the answer. We certainly didn't get the answer in real time. I'm intrigued to see if we somehow get the answer later in the show. But like he keeps talking about how he can't push himself. Like he cannot go hard enough to make his legs burn, for example. And like I have personally experienced this sensation, which is like sometimes something is wrong in your body that day. You know, you didn't get enough calories the previous day. You're a little bit sick, like whatever it is. And other pieces of your physiology become your limiter. So like the limiter is normally like I just can't push any harder because my legs are burning and I'm going as hard as I possibly can. And something else becomes the limiter. And that could be stress related. That could be lots of different things related or caused by lots of different things. And I picked up on that moment with O'Connor, as well as the comments around I can't, like my legs they're not hurting like they should be, which for anybody who's raced a bike will kind of understand what that means, I think, which is some days you cannot push hard enough to hurt yourself, which is really, it's an odd sensation, but it is a reality. And it's generally something else that's wrong. And so that was what really solidified for me. Like something else is going on with O'Connor in this Tour de France, right? Like he is stronger than what he is showing. Is it stress? Is it like, what is it that is keeping him from doing his best here? Is it a nutrition problem?
Is it
is he sick? Is it yeah, exactly. Is it something? So anyway, I guess that for me actually gave me a bit more empathy for him in this whole process. Cause like, again, I have felt that sensation. It is massively, massively frustrating where you just feel like you know,
should be able to do more.
You just can't do it. You just cannot do more, right? And it's not a pain problem. It's not any. It's just like the capacity has been decreased for some reason. Anyway, little aside. So yes, that was a melodramatic moment. I think Ben O'Connor he has to win the melodrama award in this episode. There's no question. But a bit of empathy for that, whatever that sensation was, and whatever was kind of going wrong for him. Let's so smooth operator award. We can go back into the for Gino narrative here, and Mate Mohoric comes across really, really well. I mentioned previously that he's sort of known for this. He's known for being quite eloquent. If they had shown the interview that we got in the press room, I would maybe give that to Pello Bilbao. But within the episode itself, I think Mohoric is a clear winner of the Smooth Operator Award for episode 4. Our marquee award every episode, the Jonathan Vaughters Understanding the Assignment Award.
I'm glad we've kept this. This is the first episode I'm back on. I'm glad this is still here.
Who do we think? Nominations?
Well, I put forward Vincent Lavanu, and I don't think he was. I mean, there have been other instances, and the namesake of this award was treating it differently. But I think Vincent Lavanu as a character in a Netflix show really works. You've got him talking with Ben O'Connor, you've got him in the team car, having to flip between kind of being frustrated at his rider and trying to egg him on. There's you get a lot of cycling in inverted commas from Vincent Lavanu. So it's there's a question mark over it, I think, because I don't think he's doing it deliberately like Vaughters is. And maybe that's not even 100% deliberate in the sense of understanding the assignment. But yeah, that's why I would put him there.
What about Stephen Barrett and his expressions?
I think he was just desperately trying to keep everyone together.
It wasn't
acting. That was real.
Yeah.
Did he know he knows there's a camera there, right?
Yeah.
So because that's the requirement for the Jonathan Vaughters Understanding the Assignment Award is that you know that there's a camera there, and so therefore you understand what your assignment, your character should be doing in this instance, right? You are playing a role and doing it well.
What about Felix Gall? Because these were the first words he'd ever spoken to anyone in his entire life.
So he'd actually read the brief.
Yeah, he actually had to practice his lines to figure out what he's supposed to say.
He was just being a mild-mannered Austrian. I think he was just being nice and just getting the job done. I don't think he was necessarily
okay.
In fact, he might even have been a bit like a very, very polite child at his parents' dinner party, just trying to be as nice and as quiet and out of the way and just kind of get on with things as possible.
I mean, do you think that he's watching some of this stuff happen with O'Connor and Jurdy and all the rest, and just being like does he know? So maybe this is why he should win this award this week. Does he know how that's going to be portrayed on Netflix? He's like, I know what they're going to cut together here, and I know that I'm going to be the opposite.
Well,
I'm going to sit here.
Maybe.
To foreshadow to
be the chill one.
Episode 5, Felix Gall was sort of doing the Carlos Rodriguez type thing, which Tom Pidcock describes as the silent assassin. And it's probably a lot more effective than like storming around the team bus, borderline pulling strops and throwing your toys out the pram.
But he wasn't even doing that until, I mean, even...
Was
even
he or was he not? We'll never know. We'll never know.
Actually, no, you might be right, because he was in the breakaway, which, so the context we were missing from episode, whatever, from the earlier episode, he was in the breakaway that was pulling Hindley along. Yeah. So he was already a protected rider. So yeah, maybe he's certainly a nomination.
There we go.
Nah, it's got to go to Lavanu. Yeah. It's got to go to Lavanu. Lavanu knows what's up. I do want to really quickly before we end the show today, a little bit of additional context for the Jonathan Vaughters Understanding the Assignment Award.
Oh, yeah.
I thought I'd just bring a tweet in that popped up the other day.
Who from, Kaylee? Someone we know?
This tweet is from Johan Brunel, who's still popping around.
Who is that?
Johan Brunel, for those unaware, is the former director sportif of the various iterations of U.S. Postal Discovery, etc. He was Lance Armstrong's director.
A reputable guy.
Yeah, real stand-up character.
Got it. Understand.
And he likes to lob his opinions out into the world on a pretty regular basis. And one of the individuals that group of people really despises is Jonathan Vaughters, which we don't need to get into the precise reasons why, but anyway, hates JV. And the tweet is, less than 30 minutes into episode 1 of the new Netflix show on the Tour de France, I am being reminded that Vaughters still excels at selling his bullshit. And whether you would describe it as selling bullshit or selling his team or selling whatever, I think that tweet is largely why this award is named after Jonathan Vaughters, because Jonathan Vaughters understands the assignment.
Yeah.
So does Johan Brunel, to be honest.
Well,
he's just salty he's not on the Netflix show, I think. Johan Brunel.
Salty. He's salty.
I'm surprised that Vaughters didn't reply. Usually he does. Like last year, there was a whole back and forth between Thibaut Pinot and Jonathan Vaughters on Twitter, which was sort of, that was my whole day gone when that was kicking up.
It was news.
It was great.
All right. Time to wrap up today's episode 4 for Gino. Again, a bit of a more difficult one to watch, but
light and shade
in terms of light and shade. It's the series is taking us on a journey here, and we had to had to go through some dark moments because it's an accurate reflection of some of the feeling that was happening before and during last year's Tour de France. So important to include. Next episode.
Oh, here we go.
Episode 5.
Back to the circus.
Episode 5. The Enemy Within.
Wow.
And apparently the enemy within is like a 5'4" Englishman.
Yeah.
So
it's twofold, I think, but we'll get to that next episode.
Maybe it's 2 5'4" British men wearing one big coat. So you can't tell.
All right, we'll be back in a couple days with episode 5. See you then.